For 4 years, Kate Rourke had worn the same tired blue scrubs and told herself that quiet was a kind of peace. She had almost convinced herself it was true. Tonight, the Lakeview Veterans Care Center in Hamilton had been dressed up in borrowed elegance. White linen tablecloths covered the folding tables. Catered appetizers sat on silver trays. 300 donors in pressed suits and evening dresses had come to feel good about a war they had watched from their living rooms. And at the front of the room, behind a microphone that cost more than Kate's monthly rent, stood Jeffrey Winship. Winship was the kind of man who had a television presence and nothing underneath it. He had built a small empire selling corporate leadership retreats with names like Courage Under Pressure and The Warrior Mindset. He had never served. He had never even applied. He had, however, spent 20 years mining the language of service and selling it back to people who could afford the weekend package. The Veterans Charity Board had paid him $18,000 to inspire their donors tonight. Kate moved through the room with a tray of sparkling water, keeping close to the walls, keeping her eyes low. It was something she had trained herself to do, not out of shyness, out of discipline. "Now this," Winship said, his voice dropping to the warm, intimate register he used when he wanted a room to lean in. "This is what we don't talk about enough." He was looking at her. Kate felt the shift before she saw it, 300 heads turning like a slow tide. "The quiet ones," Winship said. "The folks who show up every single day, who carry the trays, who do the small things." He smiled in her direction, the kind of smile that expected to be returned. "We romanticize the warrior, and I get that, I really do. But there is something beautiful about a person who knows her place in the story and stays in it. She's not saving lives out there." He gestured broadly toward whatever he imagined was beyond the walls. "She's here, making sure the men who did have a glass of water. And sometimes, friends, that is enough." A few people applauded. A woman near the front pressed a hand over her heart. Kate looked at the floor. She had pressed her hands against a man's carotid artery in the back of a Chinook, somewhere she was not allowed to name. She had held a tourniquet on a femoral bleed for 41 minutes in the dark, while the aircraft dropped and rose, and dropped again in mountain weather, that had no business letting anyone survive it. She had been the last voice 3 men ever heard, and she had made sure those voices were steady, because panicked voices killed people, and she had known that since she was 23 years old. She had buried all of it in this building 4 years ago, and she had not looked back. "Sweetheart," Winship's voice found her from across the room. "Be a love, bring that water up here when you get a chance." The room chuckled. Kate lifted the tray and crossed the marble floor. She set the glass beside him without a word and turned to go. "See that? No fuss." Winship raised the glass toward the room like a toast. "We could all take a lesson." More applause. Kate pushed through the service door into the corridor beyond, and stood there for a moment with her hands flat against the wall and her eyes closed. The sounds of the gala came through muffled and distant, like something happening to someone else in another country. She had been in other countries. She knew the feeling well. "He is a full piece of work." Amara, the night charge nurse, came around the corner with a medication cart and an expression that could have cured infection on contact. "You should have let the tray fall. And lose the job. You would find another one." "I like this one," Kate said, and mostly meant it. Amara studied her the way she had studied her for 4 years. There was always something in Amara's eyes during these moments, a question she was too polite to finish asking. "One day," she said, "somebody is going to need something from you that nobody else in this building can give them, and I am going to be very interested to see what you do." Kate almost smiled. "I clean bedpans, Amara." "You clean bedpans like someone who is thinking about 6 other things at the same time." Amara pushed the cart around the corner. "Go check on Frank." Ward B was where the gala noise went to die. Long-term care. The men the war had finished with and then quietly set down. Korean Vietnam, Afghanistan, the long kind the second time around. The smell was antiseptic and old upholstery, and something underneath both of those things that Kate had learned to recognize years before she ever wore scrubs. Frank Dodd was awake in bed 6. He was always awake. 83 years old. 2 tours in the jungle as a combat medic. Lungs that had been surrendering a small percentage of themselves each month for the past year. He had a week left, maybe 2, and they both knew it, and neither of them had ever once pretended otherwise. Because Frank had spent his life surrounded by people who did not pretend, and he was not about to start appreciating it now. "Heard that fellow out there," Frank said as Kate checked his oxygen line. Big voice, lot of words. "He's a motivational speaker." "There's a word for that." Kate laughed quietly. For a second she looked younger than she was. "They using you for a prop again?" "Just a moment." Frank's eyes were cloudy with cataracts, but sharp underneath in a way that had nothing to do with his eyes. He watched her hands as she straightened his blanket. Her hands had always fascinated him, though he had never said so directly, only sideways, the way old medics said most things. "You walk different than the other nurses," he said. "Do I?" "You walk like someone who learned to hold still on purpose. There's a difference between that and being still natural. You learned it." He let a breath go slowly. "Been watching people my whole career. You learn it when someone spends a long time making sure you don't flinch." Kate went quiet. Her hand stayed moving, adjusting the pillow, tucking the edge of the blanket, doing the small things. "Something's off tonight," Frank said, his voice going lower. "Air's different. I know you think that's an old man talking nonsense." "I don't think that." "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." He closed his eyes and then opened them again. "You be careful. The night your whole life changes, you never feel it coming. But you can feel the moment right before. I always could." Kate stood in the doorway after she left him, longer than she needed to. She had known men like Frank on 3 different continents. She had loved them the way you love people when the situation makes love a practical necessity. She tucked that thought somewhere low and went back to work. At 9:22 p.m., the ambulance bay doors at the end of the corridor came open as though something had been thrown against them. Not the smooth roll of a scheduled transfer, a crash, boots hitting linoleum fast, a voice that knew exactly how to pitch itself to carry without panic. "I need a trauma nurse now. He is bleeding through everything we have on him." Kate's head came up from the medication chart in her hand. The Lakeview was long-term care. It did not run a trauma unit after hours. The nearest level 1 was 40 minutes down the 403 in weather that had been dropping freezing rain since 7 o'clock. A second voice came then, lower, rough, pressed out through clenched teeth from somewhere on the gurney itself. "Rourke," a ragged pause, "is Rourke here? I need Kate Rourke." Kate's blood dropped 10 degrees. Nobody in this building knew her name the way that voice said it, not as a name, as a coordinate. She set the chart down on the counter with both hands deliberately, the way you set something down when your whole body has become very calm and very fast at the same time. The gurney came around the corner. 2 paramedics, both of them white-faced and working past the edge of what they were trained for. The man they were fighting to keep on the gurney was large, and somewhere between his right hip and the gurney pad, the blood had soaked through 4 layers of compression dressing, and was still going. His eyes found Kate across 30 feet of fluorescent corridor. He stopped fighting the paramedics. She knew what that meant before she knew anything else about him. Civilians did not stop fighting when they were bleeding out. They clawed and grabbed and begged and thrashed because that was what terror did to a body with no training. This man stopped because he was conserving. He had assessed his situation, made the calculation, and was spending his remaining energy precisely, the way only operators did, the way only people trained to stay alive in the worst possible conditions ever learned to do. He was one of hers. She would have bet the last 4 years on it. "We can't hold this," the lead paramedic said as the gurney braked in front of her, his voice carrying the particular pitch of someone who had exhausted every tool they had. "High right thigh, close to the groin. Tourniquet can't seat. He's lost somewhere around 2 liters. BP is 60 over nothing. He coded in the rig and we brought him back, but we are out of road here." Kate's eyes moved over the man on the gurney, fast, methodical. Gray skin, lips blue at the edges. The dressing on his hip was soaked and still pulsing, arterial, which meant time was already the enemy, and on his left side something else. A small, subtle hitch with every breath, a drag at the collarbone, a tightness to the chest wall that did not belong there. Tension pneumothorax building. Air leaking into the chest cavity with no way out, pressure climbing, the heart being pushed sideways 1 breath at a time. She had seen it kill a man faster than the bullet wound that caused it. 2 ways to die at once, racing each other. She knew what to do for both of them. That was the whole problem. A regular nurse did not know how to manually compress a junctional bleed against the pelvic shelf with 3 fingers and hold it there while a man screamed. A regular nurse did not read a collapsing lung from the way a collarbone moved. A regular nurse did not carry, somewhere deep in the muscle, the precise location and angle of a needle decompression she had performed 17 times in the dark in places that could never officially be named. If she stepped forward, 4 years of careful invisibility ended in front of witnesses and their phones. She looked at the man's face. "Rourke." His voice was almost nothing. "It's Halloran, Ben Halloran, you trained me. A breath. A bad one. Your father's unit. He sent me to find you before he..." The cough took the rest of it. When it cleared, there was blood at the corner of his mouth. The corridor tilted under her feet. Her father, Douglas Rourke, Master Warrant Officer, Joint Task Force 2. The man who had taught her to run a trauma assessment before she could drive, who had sat beside her at a kitchen table in Petawawa going over pressure point anatomy the way other fathers taught their daughters piano scales. The man whose number she had deleted from her phone 4 years ago. because hearing his voice broke something she could not afford to break and still keep functioning. He sent me. Which meant her father had known this was coming, which meant somewhere across the silence between them, he had reached out and sent one of his men to find her before. She did not let herself finish that thought. There would be time later. There was no time now. Ben Halloran's hand came up off the gurney and reached for something, found nothing, kept reaching. Kate caught it. Calluses on his palm were the same calluses she remembered from her own hands before she let them soften. Rope and trigger, and a life built from the same materials as hers. This was one of her father's men, bleeding out on her floor, with the gala crowd already spilling into the corridor to watch. And at the front of them, Jeffrey Winship, pushing through with a look of practiced concern and a hand raised to claim the room. All right, everyone give them space. This is what the professionals are here for. He put a hand on Kate's shoulder, with the same warm authority he used to rearrange furniture at his retreats. Sweetheart, step back. Let's get someone who knows what they're doing on the phone. You're clearly in over your head here. Kate did not move. She did not give him 1 millimeter. The monitor screamed. The numbers fell off a cliff. He's arresting, the lead paramedic said, his voice breaking. He's going to arrest right here, and I have nothing left. Frank's words came to her then, not from across the building but from somewhere further back. You walk like someone who learned to hold still on purpose. The night your whole life changes, you never feel it coming. She had been hiding for 4 years. She had told herself it was survival. She had told herself it was caution. That the people who wanted to find the woman she used to be were still out there. That silence was the only safe currency she had left. All true. Also a story she had told herself so many times she had started believing it was the only story. But Ben Halloran had driven 40 minutes through freezing rain bleeding from an arterial wound to find her, because her father had sent him, and the man was going to die on this floor in the next 90 seconds if she did not decide right now. Kate's chin came up. Her shoulders settled back and down the way they had been trained to settle by a decade of standing at attention in rooms where posture was not ceremony but communication. The tremor she had never known she was carrying left her hands, not gradually, all at once, as though it had belonged to someone else all along. When she spoke, her voice was low and flat, and carried to every corner of the corridor without effort. The voice of someone who had given orders in the dark and had people come back alive because of it. Everyone in the hallway stopped talking. Winship's hand slid off her shoulder and hung in the air. You, she pointed at the lead paramedic, 2 fingers clean and direct, your kit, 14-gauge angiocath, the biggest needle you're carrying, in my hand right now, she turned. Amara, trauma pack from the crash cart, combat gauze first, regular if you don't have it, clear this corridor of everyone who isn't staff. Now. Nobody moved. For 1 full second the room only stared, because this was not the nurse who had carried water across the lobby 40 minutes ago. I said now, Kate said, and the corridor came apart around her voice and assembled itself into something that finally knew what it was doing. She dropped to her knees beside the gurney and put her hand into the wound. Not on it, into it. 3 fingers, driven hard into the crease of the hip, pressing the femoral artery flat against the hard shelf of the pelvis. The only thing left on earth that would stop what was happening. No tourniquet reached here, no clamp, only a hand that knew precisely where to push and how hard and was prepared to cause significant pain in order to buy a life. The blood slowed, very nearly stopped. Halloran arched and drove a sound through his teeth that was not quite a scream and not quite not one. Good, a brain still receiving blood made sounds. Here, she guided the lead paramedic's hands over hers, locking them into place at the exact angle. Do not lift, do not shift, do not move for any reason. You are his blood pressure right now, nod if you understand me. He nodded, white-faced. Yes, ma'am. Kate turned to Halloran's chest. Her hands ran his ribs by feel, reading him the way she read everything. By touch and repetition, and the training that lived in her hands independently of whatever the last 4 years had tried to do to her memory. Left side, tight and swollen. Trachea beginning to deviate, neck veins distended. The air trapped around his lung was crushing his heart 1 breath at a time, and the window was nearly closed. Needle, she said, and held up her hand without looking. Amara pressed the angiocath into her palm. Kate's fingers walked the rib and found the space. Second intercostal, mid-clavicular line. She had found this spot in helicopters and in the mud, and in a building with no roof in weather she was not supposed to have survived. She uncapped the needle, set it against the skin above the 3rd rib, and drove it home with 1 clean, controlled push. The hiss was immediate and unmistakable. A long release of trapped pressure, audible in the silent corridor, filling the space where 300 people had stopped breathing. Halloran's left chest fell as the air escaped. His next breath was deeper, then deeper still. The blue at his lips faded toward gray, then toward something almost like color. On the monitor, the numbers caught, held, began to climb. 68, 74, 81, 86 over 50 and rising. The corridor was completely silent. Kate packed the wound with combat gauze around the paramedic's locked hands, driving the hemostatic dressing hard against the controlled bleed, her thumbs sealing pressure, her lips counting silently. 3 minutes. She had counted these 3 minutes before over more men than she could stand to name. Mark the time on his arm, she said. This bleed is pressure-controlled, not closed. He needs vascular surgery in the next 45 minutes or he loses the leg. Call the helicopter. Not in 5 minutes. Right now. Tell them junctional hemorrhage, manually controlled in the field. Tension pneumothorax decompressed. Have vascular and thoracic standing by on the pad when they land. The lead paramedic stared at her over their stacked hands. Who are you? His voice was almost nothing. Nurses don't. Who are you? Kate did not answer. Halloran's hand found her wrist and gripped it with what was left of him. His eyes were dim at the edges but holding. He said to tell you. Halloran breathed, each word costing him. Before he went, he said he was proud of every year. Even when you stopped answering, even when you went dark on all of them. A long, careful breath. He never for 1 second stopped being proud of you, Kate. Kate's jaw went to stone. Her eyes stayed dry by a force of will that most people in that corridor would never have occasion to understand, and could not have found in themselves if they had needed it. Don't talk, she said quietly. Her thumb did not leave the wound. You did the job, you found me, now rest. Winship found his voice. He had built an entire career on finding it, on knowing the precise shape of a moment and how to step to the front of it. He reached for that now with both hands. Well, a small self-deprecating laugh. Lucky for this young man, we happened to have a staff member on hand with a bit of first aid training. He raised his voice for the room. Let's hear it for the dedication of our care workers, folks. This is exactly the kind of... Sit down. Kate did not shout it. She did not look up from the wound. She said it at the same volume she had said everything else. The 2 words landed like a steel door closing in a quiet room. Every person in the corridor felt them. Jeffrey Winship sat down in a folding chair that happened to be behind him and did not say another word. Near the front of the crowd, an older man in a dark blazer stepped forward, silver-haired, a small regimental pin on his lapel. He had been watching from the moment the gurney came through the doors, and his face had gone through several things in that time, none of them pity. Ma'am, his voice was careful and deliberate. I did 24 years, Princess Patricia's, retired as a chief warrant officer. He paused. What I just watched you do on this floor, that was a manual junctional compression and a needle decompression of a tension pneumothorax. Done clean, under 2 minutes, no kit, no doctor, no hesitation. He held her gaze. I have seen that done exactly once in my life, and it wasn't in a hospital. He glanced at the room, then back to her. My daughter came home from Kandahar because of somebody who could do what you just did. His voice roughened at the edge. I spent years not knowing who that person was. Spent years wanting to say thank you to someone whose name I never learned. He did not look away. Whatever you were, ma'am, somebody owes you a debt they will never be able to pay. And I know that's true because I've owed one like it since 2009. The corridor was silent. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman was crying softly. Who are you, really? He said. Kate rose slowly to her feet. She talked the paramedic through the handoff in 2 quiet sentences and stepped back. She wiped her hands on the towel Amara held out. She did not curl her shoulders inward. Her chin stayed level. Her eyes came off the floor and she let them stay there. She looked first at Halloran, alive and breathing because of her hands. Then at the veteran with the regimental pin, who already understood the answer and was waiting for her to say it anyway. Then, last and longest, at Jeffrey Winship, sitting small and gray and very still in his folding chair, with no anecdote left to reach for and no microphone between himself and what the last 20 minutes had cost him. My name, Kate said, and her voice filled the room without effort, is Kate Rourke. The ambulance bay doors opened again. 3 people came through, moving the way Kate moved, scanning the room the way she scanned rooms. Not looking for exits, looking for threats, looking for one specific person. The woman in front stopped when she saw Kate across the length of the bloody corridor. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. Sergeant Rourke, her voice was even and quiet. Danielle Souza, CSS. We have been trying to find you for a long time. She walked slowly, hands visible at her sides. And I need you to know we are not the only ones who found you tonight. Kate knew the face, older, a scar at the corner of her jaw that had not been there before, but she knew it. Souza, Kate said, you look like someone who's been in a car all day. Souza almost smiled. 14 hours, Halifax to here. She glanced at Halloran. He got to you first. He was always going to. Your father made him promise 3 things: find you, hand you the drive, and tell you something he had been carrying for 4 years and could not make himself say. Kate felt the shape of what was coming before Sousa said it. He's gone, Kate said, not a question. 6 weeks ago, quietly at home, no pain, he was not afraid. Sousa let that sit for a moment, the way you set down something that has been heavy for a long time. His last lucid afternoon, he told Halloran the truth about why you left the unit, about what actually happened in that valley. Kate went very still. Your team did not die because of your call, Sousa said. That is what they told you. It was a lie, and 4 years ago we did not have the proof to unbury it. She glanced at the people around them, the remaining donors pressed against the walls, Amara, the paramedics, the regimental veteran. The route was sold. A private security contractor. 3 men in an office in Ottawa traded the location of your team for a transfer and buried the audit 7 levels deep. She met Kate's eyes and held them. Halloran spent 2 years building the case. Account numbers, names, the whole machine. He was bringing it here to you, because your father told him you were the only person left who both understood what it meant and had the standing to do something about it. The name Sousa said next landed like something dropped from a great height into still water, and Kate felt the ripples go all the way down. She had carried the weight of that valley for 4 years. She had carried it through every shift, past every man in every bed who had come home from the same kinds of places, and she had kept her mouth shut and her eyes down and told herself it was the price of being safe. It had never been her fault. The drive, Kate said. Sousa nodded at Halloran. In his jacket, inner pocket, he took 2 rounds on the highway outside Brantford and kept driving anyway. Kate turned and went back to the gurney. She reached inside Halloran's jacket and found it, a small waterproof case, stitched into the lining by someone who had known he might not be able to hand it over himself. She held it with both hands. The helicopter was 6 minutes out. Kate handed the drive to Sousa, then went back to Halloran and took his hand one more time. His eyes found her and focused. You made it, she told him, low and steady. You can stop now. You did every single thing you promised. His grip tightened once and then eased. By the time sunlight came through the windows of the Lakeview's east wing, the night was over. Halloran was in surgery at Hamilton General, stable, expected to keep the leg, expected to keep everything, because a nurse in a forgotten veterans' care ward had known precisely what to do. The people Sousa named on that drive spent the next 18 months in rooms with very serious people and very serious consequences, which was the appropriate number of rooms and consequences. Frank Dodd had been awake through all of it. When Kate came back to the ward in the early morning, he was lying with his hands folded on his chest and an expression she had seen before on the faces of men who had decided they were done carrying something heavy. Told you, he said when she sat beside him. Air was wrong all night. You told me. He was quiet for a moment. His breathing was shallow and slow. You're not going back, are you, into the shadows? No. Good. He looked at the ceiling. You know what this building is missing? Someone who speaks the language, the actual language, not the pamphlets. His eyes moved to her. The language where you sit beside someone and you already know and they know you know and nobody has to say the thing out loud. Kate looked at her hands. Her knuckles were bruised. There was someone else's blood still under her thumbnail. I know that language, she said. I know you do. His fingers found hers and held them lightly. Don't you go bury it again. Promise an old warrant officer. I promise, she said. She meant it. Frank Dodd died 11 days later, on a Tuesday morning when the light through the window was the particular gold color that Southern Ontario manages in September. Kate was with him. 3 months after that, the Dodd wing opened on the 2nd floor of the Lakeview Veterans Care Center. Kate had refused every other name they offered. The wing ran what she built: a trauma medicine program, a peer support network, a training course for clinical staff run by someone who had stood in every room these men described and come out the other side. Jeffrey Winship sent a check for $10,000 and a card that said he was sorry, in his own handwriting, which was small and careful and nothing like his speaking voice. Kate deposited the check into the wing's operating fund and did not write back, because some things are settled simply by choosing not to need them anymore. On the morning the wing opened, a young veteran came through the door, 26 years old, shaking, unable to say what was wrong, only that she was wrong, that the person she had been before was gone, and nobody she had tried to talk to understood where that person went, or how the world looked from where she was standing now. Kate sat down beside her. No clipboard, no intake form, no pamphlet language. She looked at the young woman directly, the way you look at someone when you are not going to pretend. And she said the only words that had ever actually reached her in those years. The words she had waited 4 years to hear, and had finally learned to say herself. I know exactly where you are, Kate said. I have stood in that same spot, and I am going to sit here with you until you're ready to take the first step back." She did not look at the floor. There was no curl left in her shoulders. She sat the way a person sits when they have finally stopped apologizing for the space they take up in the world. And that, in the end, was the whole point of every hard thing that had happened on the night everything changed. Before I let you go tonight, I just want to say thank you for being here. If this story moved you even a little, hit the like button. It means more than you know, and it helps other people find their way here. Drop a comment and tell me where in Canada you're listening from tonight, because I read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe to Steady Badge's stories. These are the stories that don't always make the front page, but they deserve to be heard. I'll see you next time.